Welcome to the long night. This is a quiet space for the hours when the outside world begins to soften. When the light fades, and nothing more is being asked of you. Tonight, you don't need to learn anything. You don't need to understand. And you don't need to hold on to a single word. These stories are offered gently, not as lessons to follow, but as companions for the long stretch of night. You may listen closely, or you may let the words drift through you, like breath moving in and out on its own. If your body is tired, allow it to rest. If your mind is still busy, let it be busy. There is nothing here that needs to be solved or fixed. The long night does not ask you to change or become someone better. It does not measure progress or promise transformation. It is simply here to sit with you, through a night long enough for tension to ease, for thoughts to loosen their grip, and for everything to settle naturally, in its own time. As the night continues, you may notice that these stories are not meant to push your mind in any direction. They are not designed to instruct, convince, or awaken you through effort. Instead, they move quietly, like an underground stream, working beneath the surface without asking for your attention. You do not need to follow them closely, and you do not need to remember what comes next.
Their purpose is not to promise change, but to create enough stillness for change to happen on its own. These are Zen stories, shared not as teachings to master, but as reflections to rest with. Each one touches a different aspect of human experience: thought, emotion, attachment, fear, without trying to resolve them.
As you listen, some words may resonate, while others may simply pass by unnoticed. Both are equally welcome. Nothing here requires effort or understanding. Over time, you may sense your mind loosening its grip, not because anything is being solved, but because nothing needs to be. The stories do not aim to improve you or take you somewhere else. They simply offer a gentle rhythm for the night, allowing awareness to soften and attention to drift naturally. In this way, the journey unfolds quietly, without urgency, without destination, carried by the steady flow of listening itself. As these words continue, there is nothing you need to do with your body.
You don't need to adjust your posture or change your breathing in any deliberate way. Simply notice that your body is already here, already supported by whatever you are resting on. The weight of your muscles can soften without instruction, and the small tensions you may still be holding do not need to disappear. They can remain exactly as they are.
Your breathing is already happening on its own, steady and reliable, without effort or control. You don't need to follow it closely. Just allow it to move in the background, like a quiet rhythm carrying the night forward. If thoughts continue to arise, let them come and go without engagement. There is no need to push them away, and no need to hold on to them either. In this moment, you are not preparing for anything that comes next. You are not working towards sleep, and you are not trying to relax. You are simply allowing the present moment to be exactly as it is. From this gentle settling, listening can continue naturally, without strain, without expectation, as the night slowly opens into deeper rest. As the night deepens, the movement of these stories begins in a very familiar way. Again and again, across time and cultures, the same moment quietly appears: a human being standing at the edge of understanding, believing they are ready to receive something important. Not because they are lacking, but because something within them is searching for clarity, for relief, or simply for rest. This moment does not arrive with certainty. It often arrives with confidence, with questions, or with the feeling of having already learned enough. And yet, it is precisely here, at this threshold, where the journey truly starts. Before any teaching is given, before any insight is revealed, there is always this pause, the instant where listening becomes possible. The first story begins at such a doorway, a place where intention meets habit, where knowledge meets openness, and where the night invites us to notice how full the mind may already be. You don't need to anticipate what will happen next. Simply allow the story to arrive in its own way, without expectation, without preparation, just as this moment has arrived now. There is an old Zen reflection that does not begin with answers, but with a condition of the mind. It points to a simple image, a container that has already been filled to its limit. When something is already full, nothing new can be placed inside it, no matter how valuable or refined that new thing might be. This is not a judgment, and it is not a criticism. It is simply an observation about how the mind often arrives at the threshold of wisdom. Many of us come carrying years of learning, conclusions, preferences, and carefully constructed explanations about how life works. We collect ideas the way one might collect objects, believing that understanding is something added piece by piece. Over time, the mind becomes efficient, confident, and certain. It knows what it likes, what it rejects, and what it believes to be true. Yet this very fullness can quietly become a barrier. When the mind is already occupied with what it knows, it has little space left for direct experience. New perspectives are immediately compared, evaluated, and placed into existing categories. Nothing is allowed to arrive on its own terms. This story does not suggest that knowledge is wrong or that learning has no value. It simply invites a gentle noticing. Before anything new can be received, there must be room. And room does not come from effort or accumulation. It comes from allowing the mind, just for a moment, to rest without holding on to what it already believes. From an early age, we are taught that learning means collecting information. We are rewarded for remembering, for explaining, for arriving at correct answers. Over time, this training shapes the way the mind approaches everything, including inner life. Understanding becomes something to acquire, and wisdom becomes something to possess. The mind learns to move quickly toward conclusions, often before experience has fully unfolded. This habit creates a subtle posture of certainty. When something new appears, the mind immediately asks, "Do I already know this?" If the answer feels like yes, attention relaxes, not into openness, but into dismissal. If the answer feels like no, the mind rushes to define or label and place the new information within familiar frameworks. In both cases, direct contact with experience is quietly bypassed. This is not a personal failure. It is simply the momentum of conditioning. The mind has been trained to be efficient, to conserve energy, to rely on what it already understands. Over time, this efficiency hardens into habit. Listening becomes comparison. Curiosity becomes evaluation. Presence becomes analysis. Zen does not ask us to undo this conditioning through force or discipline. It invites something much gentler. It invites us to notice the moment when the mind says, "I know," not to challenge it, and not to replace it with another belief, but simply to see it as it arises. In that quiet noticing, the habit loosens slightly, and a small space appears. In that space, experience can begin to speak for itself. When Zen speaks of a beginner's awareness, it is not describing a lack of intelligence or experience. It is pointing to a particular quality of attention, one that is open, receptive, and not yet crowded by conclusions. This awareness does not rush to name what it encounters, and it does not hurry to decide what something means. It simply meets each moment as it arrives. In this state,
Experience is allowed to be fresh, even when it is familiar. The sound you have heard many times before is heard again, without comparison. A thought arises, and instead of being judged or followed, it is noticed and allowed to pass. There is no effort to improve the moment, and no attempt to extract meaning from it.
awareness rests with what is present, without interference. This does not mean the mind becomes blank or passive. Thoughts still appear. Memories still surface. Preferences still exist. The difference lies in the relationship to them. Rather than standing above experience and analyzing it, awareness stands within experience, letting it unfold naturally. Beginner's awareness is often overlooked because it feels ordinary. There is nothing dramatic about it. It does not announce itself as insight or realization. And yet, it is precisely this simplicity that allows understanding to deepen without strain. When the mind is no longer busy defending what it already knows, it becomes available again. Zen does not ask you to remain in this state permanently or to hold on to it as an achievement. It simply invites you to notice it when it appears. Even a brief moment of this open awareness is enough. In that moment, the mind is not full, and experience is free to arrive without obstruction. As this first story settles, there is no need to reach for a conclusion. Nothing here is asking you to change the way you think or to adopt a new understanding. The invitation is much quieter than that. It is simply to notice how the mind behaves when it encounters something unfamiliar or when it believes it already understands. You may begin to see how quickly the mind fills space with opinions, with interpretations, with subtle movements of agreement or resistance. This is not something to correct. It is something to observe with patience. Just as the body can rest without being forced into stillness, the mind can soften without being pushed into silence. As you prepare to continue listening, you might allow yourself to release the need to hold on to what has just been said. Let the words fade into the background. What matters is not their content, but the small opening they may have created. A pause, a little room, a sense that nothing needs to be added right now. In this space, awareness does not have to search for meaning. It can simply be present. Thoughts may continue to arise, and that is perfectly fine. They do not need to stop in order for rest to deepen. This gentle reflection is not an ending, but a settling. From here, the night continues, carrying the next story forward in its own time, without urgency, without demand, just as listening itself continues quietly, naturally, and without effort, as the mind slowly lets go of the urge to understand, to explain, or to be certain. A deeper quiet begins to settle in. In that quiet, we no longer search for meaning. We simply allow the next moment to arrive on its own. The woman moved quietly through the room, her gestures careful, her eyes lowered. There was a weariness in her movements that spoke of long nights without rest. Gudo waited until the household settled into silence, then spoke gently. "What troubles this family?" he asked. For a moment, she said nothing. Then the words began to spill out, as if they had been waiting a long time to be heard. Her husband, she explained, had fallen into gambling and drink. When fortune favored him, he drank until rage overtook him. When luck turned against him, he borrowed money, sinking deeper into debt. Some nights he came home violent. Other nights, he did not come home at all. The children had learned to stay silent. The grandmother lived in constant worry. And she herself carried the weight of holding the household together, day after day, without knowing how long it could last. Gudo listened without interruption. He did not offer advice. He did not speak of karma or moral failure. He simply remained present, allowing the suffering to be fully seen. When she finished, the room felt strangely still. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady and unjudging. When the woman finished speaking, Gudo remained silent for a long moment. He did not respond with teachings. He did not speak of discipline or vows. Instead, he reached into his robe and removed a small amount of money. "Please," he said softly, "use this to buy good wine and something nourishing to eat, then rest. I will remain here and meditate." The woman looked at him in confusion, uncertain she had understood. But his expression was calm, without hesitation. As night deepened, the household withdrew into sleep. The lamp dimmed. The rain slowed to a quiet tapping. Near midnight, the husband returned. His steps were unsteady. The smell of alcohol filled the room. Seeing a stranger seated calmly inside his home, he stiffened, ready for confrontation. But Gudo greeted him without fear. "I was caught in the storm," he said gently. "Your wife offered me shelter. In gratitude, I have brought wine and food for you." The man hesitated. Then his tension softened. He drank. He ate. Soon, he collapsed onto the floor and fell into a heavy sleep. Throughout the night, Gudo remained seated beside him, unmoving, breathing steadily, holding the space in silence. The night passed without disturbance. Gudo remained seated beside the sleeping man. His posture relaxed, his breath slow and even. Nothing was forced, nothing was corrected. When morning light finally entered the room, pale and quiet, the husband stirred. He woke with the dull confusion that followed heavy drinking. For a moment, he did not recognize where he was. Then he noticed the monk still sitting nearby, unchanged from the night before. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice rough. "I am Gudo of Kyoto," the monk replied simply. "I am traveling to Edo." At the sound of that name, the man's face drained of color. He knew who Gudo was. Everyone did. This was the spiritual teacher of the emperor himself. Shame rose in his chest like a sudden heat. He struggled to sit upright. Instead of reproach, Gudo spoke calmly. "Life is very brief," he said. "If you continue this way, you will have no time left to do what truly matters. And those who love you will continue to suffer." The words landed without force. They were not sharp. They did not accuse. They simply named what was already true. The man lowered his head. His voice trembled. "How can I ever repay you for this?" he asked. Gudo smiled faintly. "There is nothing to repay." They walked together for some distance that morning, the road quiet beneath their feet. Before parting, the man stopped and bowed deeply. "I will follow you," he said. "From this day forward, I will not turn back." And he did not. From that moment on, he became known as Munyan, the one who never turned back. The story does not end with praise or reward. It ends with a simple truth. Transformation does not always arrive through correction. Sometimes it arrives through being met without judgment. As this understanding settles, the mind no longer needs to grasp or resist. And in that letting go, another story quietly waits to be told. The man's decision was not dramatic. There were no vows spoken aloud. No promises made to the heavens. He simply walked, step by step, beside Gudo, without asking for reassurance, without demanding certainty about where the path would lead. What changed him was not authority, not reputation, not fear of punishment. It was the simple fact of being seen without condemnation.
Gudo did not try to fix him. He did not shame him into improvement. He did not demand transformation. He offered presence. And in that presence, the man encountered himself clearly for the first time. This is how Zen understands compassion, not as indulgence, not as control, but as the courage to remain open when closing off would be easier.
When judgment falls away, something deeper begins to reorganize on its own. The Buddha taught that hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This story shows how quietly that truth unfolds in ordinary human life. And as the heart absorbs this understanding, another doorway begins to open, one that leads not through compassion, but through the letting go of reputation itself. In a quiet Japanese village where reputation shaped destiny and moral order held the community together, there lived a Zen master whose presence alone inspired respect. His name was Hakuin. For many years, he was regarded as a model of purity and discipline, a man whose life seemed untouched by desire or wrongdoing. Parents spoke of him with admiration. Neighbors trusted him without question. His name had become synonymous with virtue. Not far from Hakuin's temple lived a young woman whose parents ran a small food shop. She was gentle and hardworking, and like many in the village, she lived under the weight of strict expectations. When her parents discovered that she was pregnant, their world collapsed in shame and fury. In that society, such news was not merely personal. It was communal disgrace. Under relentless pressure, the young woman finally spoke a name. She said the child belonged to Hakuin. The accusation spread quickly. Villagers stormed the temple, demanding answers. When they confronted him, their voices sharp with anger and disbelief, Hakuin listened quietly. He did not protest. He did not defend himself. When they finished, he replied with only 3 words. "Is that so?" His calm response shocked them. To their ears, it sounded like an admission. Overnight, the respect he had built over decades vanished. People who once bowed now turned away. Students stopped coming. Whispers followed him through the village streets. His good name dissolved as quickly as it had been formed. When the child was born, the parents brought the baby to Hakuin and left it in his care. By then, he was fully ostracized. Yet he received the child without resistance. He found milk for the infant, even when neighbors refused to help him. He washed its clothes, carried it with him as he walked, and tended to it through sleepless nights. He lived this way for a full year, accepting disgrace without bitterness. Eventually, the truth emerged. Overcome by guilt, the young woman confessed that the real father was a man who worked at the fish market. Her parents, horrified by what they had done, returned to Hakuin in shame. They bowed deeply and apologized, asking for the child to be returned. Hakuin listened in silence, just as he had before. When they finished speaking, he handed the baby back to them gently and spoke the same 3 words once more. "Is that so?" What made Hakuin's response so extraordinary was not silence itself, but what that silence revealed. He understood that praise and blame rise from the same source, the unstable ground of other people's minds. To cling to one is to become vulnerable to the other. By meeting both with the same openness, he remained free. Hakuin did not deny the accusation because denial would have meant attachment to reputation. He did not protest because protest would have placed his peace in the hands of public opinion. Instead, he allowed events to unfold without resistance, knowing that truth does not require defense. Time itself would reveal what words could not. This is not passivity. It is clarity.
Hakuin acted where action was required and remained silent where silence was wiser. When the child was brought to him, he cared for it fully. When the truth emerged, he released it without hesitation. In both moments, his response was the same because his inner position had not shifted. Most suffering around reputation comes from the belief that our worth
depends on how we are seen. When others praise us, we feel elevated. When they blame us, we feel diminished. Zen points to a different possibility, one in which worth is not borrowed from opinion, but rooted in something deeper and unmoving. The phrase, "Is that so?" is not indifference. It is the sound of a mind that no longer argues with reality. It does not grasp at approval, nor does it resist misunderstanding. It simply allows what arises to pass through without leaving a wound. As this understanding settles, the need to protect an image begins to soften, and when the image loosens, the heart finds a wider space to rest.
Another story waits beyond this one, pointing not to reputation, but to the quiet power of natural influence, where nothing is forced and nothing is resisted. In 17th century Japan, there lived a Zen master named Bankei, whose way of teaching was unlike any other. While many teachers relied on scripture, debate, and complex explanations, Bankei spoke simply, directly, and without ornament. He did not quote sutras to impress. He did not argue to persuade. He spoke only from what he had seen for himself. People came to hear him from every walk of life. Farmers stood beside officials. Merchants listened alongside monks from rival schools. They gathered not because Bankei demanded respect, but because something in his presence felt unmistakably genuine. His authority did not come from position or force. It arose naturally, without effort. Not everyone welcomed this influence. A priest from another sect watched his own following diminish as people turned toward Bankei's talks. Jealousy took root. Convinced that Bankei must be using some trick to attract such crowds, the priest decided to confront him publicly and expose his supposed weakness. One day, as Bankei was speaking to a large assembly about the unborn nature of the mind, the priest stood up and shouted across the crowd. He spoke loudly, his voice sharp with challenge. "People may respect you and obey what you say," he declared, "but I do not respect you. Can you make someone like me obey you?" The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned to Bankei. Many expected anger or a display of spiritual power. Instead, Bankei smiled gently. "Come closer," he said calmly. "Stand here beside me, and I will show you." Something unexpected happened. Without fully understanding why, the priest stepped forward. Bankei gestured softly. "Come to my left." The priest moved. Then Bankei said, almost thoughtfully, "No, we may speak more easily if you stand on my right." Again, the priest shifted position. Bankei looked at him with warm eyes. "You see," he said quietly, "you are already obeying me, and you do so without force. You are a very gentle person. Now please, sit down and listen." The tension dissolved. Laughter moved through the crowd, not mocking, but relieved. The priest, his aggression disarmed, sat down. The confrontation ended without victory or defeat. Nothing had been proven, yet everything had been shown.
What Bankei revealed was not dominance, but a deeper truth. True authority does not compel, it invites. It does not arise from resistance, but from presence so steady that others naturally align with it. When force meets force, conflict multiplies. But when openness meets aggression, something unexpected becomes possible. The priest did not obey because he was overpowered. He obeyed because he felt no threat. As this understanding settles, the mind begins to recognize
A quieter form of influence, one that does not argue or push, and from that quiet place, another story waits to unfold. What Bankei revealed was a form of strength that does not rely on resistance. He did not attempt to overpower the priest's challenge, nor did he retreat from it. By remaining open and steady, he allowed the moment to resolve itself.
The situation shifted not because someone won, but because nothing was opposed. This is how natural authority functions. It does not seek compliance. It does not demand recognition. It simply remains grounded. And from that grounding, influence arises on its own. When there is no inner agitation, there is nothing for conflict to attach to. Most struggles for control come from fear. The fear of being dismissed. The fear of losing position. The fear of not being respected. When those fears are present, we push, we raise our voices, we harden our opinions. Yet this effort often produces the very resistance we hope to avoid.
Bankei's response points to another way. When the mind is settled, action becomes precise and effortless. Words land softly, yet clearly. Others respond not because they are coerced, but because they feel safe enough to listen. In this space, authority is not something claimed, it is something recognized. As this understanding sinks in, the urge to argue begins to loosen. The need to convince softens, and the heart starts to sense that influence rooted in calm presence reaches further than force ever could. From here, the path turns inward once more, toward a story that examines the subtle difference between love and attachment, and how truth reveals itself when nothing is hidden. As the quiet strength of natural authority settles, another question begins to surface. One that does not concern power or influence, but the delicate line between love and attachment, and what happens when truth is brought fully into the light. In a quiet mountain monastery, where the days moved according to the rhythm of bells and breath, a small community of practitioners lived under strict discipline. Among them was a nun named Asun. Her head was shaved, her robes plain, her conduct careful and sincere. Yet there was a natural clarity in her presence that drew attention without intention. She did not seek notice. She did not cultivate charm. Still, something in her way of moving through daily tasks, walking meditation, silent meals, long hours of sitting carried a quiet brightness. For some of the younger monks, this presence became a disturbance they did not understand. At first, it appeared only as distraction. During meditation, the breath would slip away. The mind would wander. Ordinary discipline began to feel strained. Rather than looking inward, one monk allowed the confusion to grow outward into fantasy. He mistook admiration for intimacy, reverence for desire. One evening, unable to contain the feelings he had been feeding in silence, he wrote Asun a letter. His words spoke of deep connection, of spiritual destiny, of love that he believed transcended rules and vows. He asked to meet her privately, away from the eyes of the community. Asun read the letter slowly. She recognized its sincerity, but she also saw the misunderstanding at its core. This was not love. It was attachment dressed in sacred language.
and attachment, when hidden, only grows stronger. She did not respond in secret. The next day, during the master's public teaching, the hall filled as usual. The air was still when the lecture ended, and silence settled. Esun rose calmly from her seat. Without anger, without embarrassment, she addressed the monk directly, her voice clear and steady. "If what you feel is truly love," she said, "then come and embrace me now." The room froze. The monk's face flushed with heat. His body would not move. In the open light of the assembly, his private desire lost its power. What had seemed noble in secrecy could not stand in truth. Esun sat down. Nothing more was said, but something essential had been revealed. What Esun revealed was not a moral lesson, but a mirror. She understood that desire survives in shadow and weakens in light. What is genuine does not need secrecy. What is confused cannot endure openness. By bringing the feeling into the shared space of the community, she allowed truth to speak without accusation. The monk was not shamed by her words. He was freed by them. In that moment of stillness, he could finally see the difference between appreciation and possession, between admiration and demand. What had felt powerful in the privacy of his imagination dissolved when exposed to reality as it was. This is how Zen approaches confusion, not by suppressing it and not by indulging it, but by allowing it to be seen clearly.
When nothing is hidden, there is nothing to defend. When nothing is defended, the mind relaxes back into balance. Esun did not reject the monk, nor did she accept his request. She simply refused to participate in illusion. In doing so, she protected both of them from unnecessary suffering. Compassion, here, did not take the form of
comfort, but of honesty, offered without aggression. Love that is real does not seek to take. It does not ask another to abandon their path. It does not require secrecy to survive. Attachment, on the other hand, needs darkness. It feeds on imagination and collapses when asked to stand in the open. As this understanding settles, the heart begins to recognize a gentler truth. What we often call love is sometimes only the wish to fill an inner emptiness. And when that emptiness is met with awareness rather than fantasy, it naturally loosens its grip. From this quiet clarity, the night continues onward, toward a story that points not to desire or restraint, but to the ordinary mind itself, and the freedom hidden within what we already are. What gave Esun's response its power was not confrontation, but timing. She did not expose the monk in anger, nor did she wait until the confusion deepened into harm. She spoke when the community was present, when truth could be held by the space itself rather than carried by any single person. In that moment, no one was attacked, no one was elevated. The illusion dissolved on its own. Zen understands that clarity does not require cruelty. When truth is spoken without aggression, it corrects without wounding. Esun did not shame the monk for his desire. She did not label him impure or unworthy. She simply refused to meet him in secrecy, where imagination thrives and distortion grows. The monk's silence was not failure. It was recognition. Recognition that what he felt could not stand in daylight. Recognition that what he called love was bound to expectation and possession. And in seeing this clearly, the grip of that desire loosened without force. This is the difference between suppression and insight. Suppression hides confusion. Insight dissolves it. When truth is allowed to emerge naturally, the mind no longer needs to struggle against itself. It returns to balance the way a shaken bowl of water slowly becomes still again. and does not ask us to become free of desire by denying it. It asks us to stop hiding. What is hidden gains power. What is seen loses its hold. Esun's action reminds us that freedom does not come from perfect discipline, but from honest awareness. When feelings are acknowledged without fantasy and met without indulgence, they reveal their true nature and pass. Love that is real does not fear exposure. It does not need secrecy to survive. It does not demand anything in return. Attachment, however, depends on imagination,
on specialness, on being unseen. When brought fully into awareness, it dissolves. As this understanding settles, the heart begins to rest more easily. There is less need to protect, less need to pretend, less need to act from hidden longing. What remains is a quiet simplicity, a return to what is already present.
From this simplicity, the night opens into another teaching, one that does not speak of love or restraint, but of the ordinary mind itself, and how the freedom we seek has never been elsewhere. In a quiet mountain monastery, where the days passed without urgency and the seasons came and went without announcement, a young monk named Joshu approached his teacher, Nansen. Joshu had practiced diligently for many years. He had studied, meditated, and followed the forms with sincerity. Yet a subtle unease remained in him, a sense that despite all his effort, something essential was still unclear. One day, unable to ignore this uncertainty any longer, Joshu bowed and asked a simple question. "Master," he said, "what is the way?" Nansen answered without hesitation. "Ordinary mind is the way." Joshu was surprised. The answer felt too simple, almost disappointing. He had expected something more elevated, something removed from daily life. After a moment, he asked again, "If ordinary mind is the way, should I try to direct myself toward it?" Nansen shook his head gently. "If you try to direct yourself toward it, you move away from it." This only deepened Joshu's confusion. Then how can one know the way, he asked. If we do not try, how can we be certain? Nansen replied slowly. The way is not a matter of knowing or not knowing. Knowing is illusion. Not knowing is blankness. When you truly realize the way, it is vast and boundless, like empty space. Nothing is lacking, and nothing is extra. At these words, something loosened in Joshu. Not an idea, not an insight he could explain, but a soft release of the tension that had been driving his seeking. For the first time, he sensed that what he had been searching for was not hidden behind effort, discipline, or special understanding. It was present in the very awareness that had been asking the question. In Zen, ordinary mind does not mean careless or dull. It means the mind before striving, before judging, before trying to improve itself. The mind that hears a sound and simply hears. The mind that breathes without comment. The mind that notices a thought rise and fall without following it. We often imagine that awakening must be extraordinary. We look for dramatic experiences, permanent peace, or a state beyond ordinary life. Yet Nansen points in the opposite direction. The moment we try to escape the ordinary, we step away from what is already complete. Ordinary mind is the mind that is reading these words now. The awareness that does not need to be fixed or refined before it can be whole. When we stop dividing experience into spiritual and non-spiritual, sacred and mundane, the way reveals itself quietly in everything. Washing hands, walking slowly, feeling tired, listening to the night. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be removed. The way is not something to reach. It is something to stop leaving. And as this understanding settles, the mind grows quieter without being forced, resting naturally in what has always been here. What makes this teaching so difficult to receive is not its complexity, but its closeness. We are conditioned to believe that what matters most must be distant, rare, or hidden behind effort. Because ordinary mind feels familiar, we overlook it. Because it does not announce itself, we assume it is incomplete. From an early age, we are taught to improve, either to advance, to become something more.
This habit quietly follows us into spiritual life. We begin to treat awakening as another achievement, something earned through discipline, struggle, or special understanding. Without noticing, we turn practice into pursuit, and pursuit into tension. In this way, the very effort to awaken becomes the obstacle.
We search for a different state while standing inside the one that is already complete. We wait for silence while listening to thoughts. We wait for peace while judging experience. We wait for clarity while trying to escape what is here. Ordinary mind is missed because it does not feel special. It does not promise transformation. It does not separate itself from daily life. It appears as simple awareness, unremarkable and steady, easily overshadowed by thought and expectation. When we sit in meditation and feel restless, we believe something has gone wrong. When the mind wanders, we think we have failed. Yet,
this wandering mind is not outside the way. It is the very movement appearing within awareness. Nothing is left. Nothing is broken. Zen does not ask us to eliminate thought or perfect attention. It asks us to stop arguing with experience. The moment we stop trying to improve the mind, we begin to notice what has been present all along.
Awareness does not come and go. Only attention does. This is why Nansen says that directing ourselves toward the way moves us away from it. Direction implies distance. Seeking implies absence. But ordinary mind is not elsewhere. It is not waiting to be uncovered. It is already functioning, quietly holding every sensation, every sound, every thought, without effort. We miss the ordinary because we are always leaning forward. When the leaning stops, even briefly, the mind rests by itself, not in a special state, but in its natural condition. And in that resting, something becomes clear without explanation. There was never a gap to cross.
There was never a destination to reach. There was only the habit of leaving what was already here. Seeking appears harmless at first. It feels sincere, even noble. We believe that if we search long enough, practice hard enough, or refine ourselves deeply enough, we will eventually arrive at something lasting. Yet Zen points to a quiet paradox. The more urgently we seek, the further we seem to go. This happens because seeking always assumes distance. It places fulfillment somewhere ahead, just out of reach, and positions the present moment as insufficient. Even when the intention is peaceful, the movement itself carries subtle tension. The mind leans forward, waiting for a future state to replace what is here now. In practice, this often shows up as constant evaluation. We measure meditation sessions, compare days of clarity with days of restlessness, and quietly judge ourselves for not progressing as expected. Without realizing it, we turn awareness into an object and ourselves into a project. The mind becomes busy trying to improve the mind. Nansen's teaching points directly to this habit. Ordinary mind cannot be reached through effort because effort reinforces the sense of separation. The moment we try to grasp awareness, we step outside of it. The moment we try to hold stillness, we introduce movement. Seeking also divides experience into success and failure. Calm becomes success. Distraction becomes failure. Peace becomes something to achieve. Yet awareness holds all of these equally.
It does not prefer stillness over noise. It does not reject thought in favor of silence. It simply allows whatever arises to come and go. This does not mean that practice is useless or that discipline has no place. It means that practice is not meant to produce a special state. Its function is to reveal the tension created by seeking itself. When that tension is seen clearly, it naturally loosens. There is a subtle shift that happens when seeking relaxes. Attention stops scanning for results. The body softens. The breath deepens without instruction. Thoughts continue, but they are no longer treated as obstacles. They are simply movements within a larger field of awareness. In this moment, nothing has changed on the surface. Life remains ordinary. Sounds come and go. Sensations rise and fall. Yet something essential has stopped struggling. The mind is no longer trying to arrive somewhere else. This is not an achievement. It is a release, and in that release, ordinary mind reveals itself not as a goal to reach, but as the quiet ground that has been present beneath every step of the search. As the habit of seeking loosens, something simple becomes apparent. The mind does not need to be guided back to itself. It has never truly left. What relaxes is not awareness, but the effort that kept trying to improve it.
When that effort softens, experience continues exactly as before. Yet it is no longer treated as a problem to solve. Ordinary mind is not a state to maintain. It does not need protection. It does not disappear when attention wanders or when thoughts become busy. It remains present through clarity and confusion alike. What changes is the relationship to experience. The impulse to correct, to measure, to arrive somewhere else quietly fades. This is why Zen does not offer a final conclusion. There is no finish line where practice ends and life begins. Washing hands, feeling tired, listening to the night, and noticing a thought pass, none of these stand outside the way. When seeking ends, even briefly, life is no longer divided into spiritual and ordinary. It is simply lived. Rest, here, does not mean stopping activity. It means stopping resistance. The body breathes. The mind thinks. Sounds arise and fade. Nothing needs to be added, and nothing needs to be removed. The simplicity of this is easy to miss, yet it is always available. From this resting, the night continues naturally. Another story approaches, not about understanding or effort, but about how burden is carried and how easily it can be set down when it is finally seen.
A monk once came to his teacher carrying a quiet frustration. He had practiced diligently for many years. He had studied the teachings or followed the form and devoted long hours to meditation. Yet something in him still felt unsettled, as though he were standing on shifting ground. Bowing respectfully, he asked, "Master, what is the essential teaching of Zen?" The teacher looked at him for a long moment and then asked, "What do you have with you right now?" The monk was confused. He glanced at his robe, his hands, the floor beneath him. "Nothing," he replied. The teacher nodded, then put it down. The monk felt the question tighten around him. Put down what he asked. "If I am holding nothing, what is there to release?" The teacher answered calmly. "If you are holding nothing, then what is weighing you down?" The monk fell silent. For the first time, he noticed the tension he had been carrying without recognizing it. It was not in his hands, nor in his posture, but in his constant effort to grasp something invisible. Insight, assurance, a sense of completion. Even the wish to be free had become something he was holding tightly. Zen often points to this subtle burden. We carry ideas about who we are supposed to be, how practice should feel, and what realization must look like. These ideas are not solid objects, yet they weigh heavily. We protect them, defend them, and organize our lives around them, often without noticing the strain. The teacher did not tell the monk what to believe or how to change. He simply revealed that the sense of heaviness came from grasping itself. When there is nothing to hold, there is also nothing to lose. When nothing is being carried, movement becomes effortless. In that moment, the monk did not gain new understanding. Something else happened instead. The pressure he had been maintaining quietly released. The search softened. The ground beneath him felt stable, not because it had changed, but because he had stopped trying to secure it. Zen does not promise that life will become light by adding wisdom. It suggests something far simpler, when we see clearly what we are holding on to and allow it to fall away. We discover that there was never anything essential missing. There is nothing to grasp. There is nothing to defend. And in this letting go, the mind rests naturally, unburdened, exactly where it has always been. What the monk discovered was not a new idea, but an unnoticed habit. Long before we become aware of it,
We learn to carry weight in subtle forms. Expectations about progress, images of who we should be, assumptions about what practice must eventually deliver. None of these are tangible, yet together they create a constant pressure that follows us through even the quietest moments. This weight often disguises itself as sincerity.
we believe that holding tightly shows commitment, that effort proves seriousness, that striving demonstrates respect for the path. Without realizing it, we turn practice into a form of vigilance. We monitor ourselves. We compare today with yesterday. We wonder whether we are getting closer or drifting away. Zen does not deny this impulse. It simply asks us to see it clearly. The burden is not created by life itself, but by the story we carry about how life should unfold. Even the wish to be free can become a form of grasping when it is treated as something to achieve rather than something to notice. When attention turns inward,
We may begin to sense this weight directly. It appears as tightness in the chest, as restlessness in the body, as a subtle urgency beneath thought. We may have felt it for years without naming it. And yet, the moment it is seen, something changes. The weight does not need to be removed. It begins to loosen on its own.
this is because holding requires effort. Letting go does not. When the mind stops reinforcing its expectations, experience becomes simpler. Breathing happens. Thoughts arise and fade. Sensations come and go. Nothing is being managed. Nothing is being carried forward. Zen points out that freedom is not found by perfecting ourselves, but by noticing where effort is unnecessary. When we see clearly what we have been holding without reason, the hand opens naturally, not through force, but through understanding. In this opening, the body softens. The mind grows quieter without being silenced. Life continues exactly as it is, but it no longer feels heavy. The burden was never imposed from outside. It was maintained from within. And when that maintenance stops, even briefly, rest becomes possible without conditions. Letting go is often misunderstood as an action we must perform. We imagine it requires effort, discipline, or a deliberate decision to release something we are holding. Yet in Zen, letting go is not an act of will. It is the natural result of seeing clearly. When we finally recognize what we have been carrying, the grip loosens on its own. There is no moment of forcing the hand open. There is only the quiet realization that holding was never necessary. In this way, release happens without instruction, without struggle, and without drama. This is why the teacher did not tell the monk how to put anything down. He pointed instead to the weight itself. Once the monk noticed the tension he had been maintaining, the effort behind it could no longer continue unnoticed.
Awareness interrupted habit, and habit, when seen clearly, loses its momentum. The same process unfolds in our own experience. We may notice that when attention becomes gentle and honest, certain thoughts lose their urgency. Long-standing worries soften. Old narratives no longer demand to be repeated. Nothing is pushed away.
Nothing is resolved. The mind simply stops feeding what it no longer believes it needs. This deepening does not arrive as a dramatic shift. It often feels almost anticlimactic. Life looks the same. The body moves as before. Thoughts still arise. Yet something subtle has changed. The sense of carrying a burden has diminished. Experience feels lighter, not because it has improved, but because resistance has eased. Zen trusts this process completely. It does not rush release, and it does not measure progress. When conditions are right, letting go happens by itself. The way a clenched muscle relaxes once it realizes there is no danger. In this space, effort falls away without being rejected. The mind rests, not because it has achieved rest, but because there is nothing left to hold. What remains is a simple presence, steady and unremarkable, supporting everything without effort. As this understanding settles, it becomes clear that letting go is not something added to life. It is something that happens when we stop interfering. The weight we carried did not belong to circumstances, responsibilities, or even to thought itself. It belonged to the constant effort to manage experience, to secure certainty, to hold life in a particular shape. When that effort eases, even briefly, there is a quiet sense of relief. Not excitement, not accomplishment, just the absence of strain. The body breathes more freely. The mind moves without urgency. Nothing has been solved, yet nothing feels pressing. Zen does not offer a technique for maintaining this state. It does not promise permanence. It simply points to the fact that burden appears only when something is being grasped. When nothing is held, nothing weighs us down. Life continues with the same sounds, the same movements, the same ordinary moments, but they are no longer resisted. This is what it means to set the burden down. Not by rejecting life, and not by withdrawing from it, but by meeting it without the added weight of expectation. When the mind stops carrying what it does not need, it naturally finds its own balance. From this place of ease, another question begins to emerge. If so much of our weight comes from holding on, what happens when we stop clinging to outcomes altogether? What happens when we meet life without trying to protect or control it? The next story turns toward this question, not through effort or explanation, but through a quiet encounter that reveals how freedom appears when nothing is defended. A young man once traveled a great distance to study with a respected Zen teacher. He had read many texts, listened to countless talks, and gathered ideas from different traditions. Yet he felt that something essential remained just beyond his grasp. When he finally arrived at the teacher's hermitage, he bowed deeply and said, "I have studied the teachings for many years. Please help me understand the truth." The teacher looked at him quietly and asked, "Where are you from?" The student answered. "And how did you get here?" The teacher continued. "I walked for many days. The student replied. The teacher nodded. Then you already know how to walk. The student was confused. But I did not come here to learn how to walk, he said. I came to understand. The teacher smiled gently. If someone explained walking to you for 1,000 years, would that help you take a single step? The question landed softly, without accusation. The student fell silent. The teacher continued.
Understanding does not come from hearing about experience. It comes from standing inside it. No one can breathe for you. No one can feel your hunger. No one can live this moment in your place. The student wanted to ask another question, but the words did not come. He noticed instead the sound of wind moving through the trees, the weight of his body on the ground, the steady rhythm of his breath. None of these had been taught to him. They were already happening. Zen does not reject teaching, but it does not mistake description for reality. Words can point. Stories can invite, but they cannot replace direct contact. The moment we rely on explanation to do our living for us, we step away from what is immediate. The teacher did not offer a final answer. He did not summarize the lesson. He simply sat, fully present. In that silence, the student began to sense that what he had been searching for was not something that could be handed to him. It was something that could only be met, directly, where he already stood. And in that meeting, no explanation was required. What the student encountered was not a rejection of learning, but a correction of where learning ends. Zen recognizes the value of words, teachings, and guidance, yet it draws a clear line between explanation and experience. No amount of description can
replace direct contact. No interpretation can stand in for what is actually lived. We often try to borrow understanding. We repeat phrases that sound wise. We collect insights that resonate. We measure ourselves against what others have realized. This borrowing feels reassuring, but it quietly delays meeting our own experience. We begin to live one step removed, interpreting life instead of inhabiting it. Experience does not function this way. It cannot be transferred. It cannot be stored. It happens only where you are. Breathing, hearing, sensing, and feeling do not require permission or instruction. They are already complete.
When attention rests with them, understanding unfolds without commentary. This is why Zen places such emphasis on immediacy. The present moment is not a stepping stone toward realization. It is the place where realization appears, if it appears at all. When we wait for understanding to arrive through explanation,
we overlook the clarity already functioning beneath thought. Reflection here is not analysis. It is a quiet recognition. Recognition that awareness does not need to be improved before it can be trusted. Recognition that what is most essential is already occurring without effort. Recognition that understanding deepens not by adding more, but by removing the distance we place between ourselves and what is happening. When we stop leaning on borrowed insight, the mind feels exposed at first. There is no script to follow, no conclusion to repeat. Yet this exposure is also a relief. Nothing needs to be maintained. Nothing needs to be defended. Life meets itself directly. In this directness, experience becomes its own teacher. Each moment instructs without words. Each breath completes itself. And understanding, when it arises, does so quietly, without needing to be claimed. Direct experience is simple, yet it is often overlooked because it feels too close. It does not announce itself as insight, and it does not present conclusions. It appears as the immediacy of what is happening before thought begins to comment. the sound that reaches the ear, the weight of the body resting, the breath moving in and out without instruction. Zen points here again and again, not because it is profound, but because it is unavoidable. Wherever you are, experience is already taking place. You do not need to enter it. You are already inside it. What obscures this recognition is the habit of stepping back and explaining what is happening instead of meeting it directly. When attention rests with direct experience,
there is no distance between observer and observed. Hearing happens without a listener being added. Breathing happens without a controller. Sensation arises without needing a story. This does not require effort. In fact, effort reintroduces separation. At first, direct experience may feel unstable. Without concepts to lean on,
the mind can feel exposed, even uncertain. There is no conclusion to hold, no understanding to claim. Yet this uncertainty is not a problem. It is a sign that borrowed structures are no longer doing the work. Over time, something settles, not into a belief, but into trust. Trust that experience does not need supervision. Trust that awareness can meet whatever arises without preparation. Thoughts continue, but they are no longer treated as guides. They are simply part of what appears. This is why Zen emphasizes sitting, walking, and living as practice, not to cultivate a special state, but to return again and again to what is already happening.
When experience is met directly, there is nothing to interpret and nothing to resist. Life reveals itself moment by moment, complete without explanation. In this directness, understanding does not accumulate. It clears, and what remains is not something new, but the simple fact of being here, fully, without distance.
As this understanding settles, it becomes clear that nothing essential needs to be carried forward from these reflections. Direct experience does not accumulate. It does not build toward a conclusion. Each moment completes itself and then gives way to the next. When we stop trying to preserve understanding, experience remains fresh, uncomplicated, and sufficient. Zen does not ask us to abandon teaching or reflection. It asks us to see their proper place. Words can orient us, but they cannot live for us. Insight can open a door, but it cannot walk through it on our behalf. The moment we recognize this, attention naturally returns to where life is actually unfolding. Standing where you are does not mean holding onto clarity or maintaining a special awareness. It means allowing each moment to arise without demanding that it confirm anything. The mind may be quiet or busy. The body may feel light or heavy. None of this stands outside the way. When experience is met directly, there is no need to improve it. This is the simplicity Zen returns to again and again. Nothing mystical, nothing distant. Just this life, exactly as it appears, moment after moment, when we stop leaning on explanation. Life supports itself. From here, another teaching quietly comes into view. Not about understanding or experience, but about how suffering grows from the stories we add to what happens, and how freedom begins when those stories are gently set aside. A man once came to a Zen teacher weighed down by a sense of constant difficulty. Nothing in his life appeared especially dramatic. His days were ordinary, his work stable, and his relationships familiar. And yet, beneath everything, there was a persistent feeling of strain, as though life itself were heavier than it needed to be. He asked the teacher, "Why does life feel so exhausting?" Even when nothing is obviously wrong, the teacher did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked the man to describe his day from the moment he woke until the moment he went to sleep. As the man spoke, he began to notice something subtle. Each event was followed by a thought. Each thought carried an interpretation. Each interpretation added weight. A delayed reply became a sign of rejection. A small mistake became proof of failure. A passing discomfort became a warning about the future. None of these stories were spoken aloud, yet they ran continuously beneath the surface, shaping how each moment was experienced. The teacher listened carefully and then said, "You are not tired from what happens. You are tired from what you add."
The man was puzzled. "But these thoughts feel automatic," he said. "I don't choose them." The teacher nodded. "Stories often feel automatic because they have been repeated for a long time. But repetition does not make them true. It only makes them familiar." Zen observes that suffering rarely comes from raw experience alone.
Sensations arise and pass. Events occur and end. What prolongs discomfort is the narrative that keeps returning to them, replaying, explaining, and predicting. The mind carries these stories forward, even when the moment they describe has already passed. Most of the weight we feel is not carried in the body, but in interpretation. We relive what has already ended. We anticipate what has not yet arrived. In doing so, we rarely meet what is actually here. The teacher did not tell the man to stop thinking or to control his mind. He simply invited him to notice the difference between what happens and what is said about what happens.
In that noticing, a small gap appeared, and in that gap, the possibility of ease quietly emerged. As the man sat quietly with the teacher's words, something subtle began to reveal itself. When he looked closely at his day, he could see that many moments were actually neutral. A sound, a delay, a passing thought.
On their own, they did not carry the heaviness he felt. The weight arrived afterward, when the mind explained what those moments meant. Zen reflection invites us to notice this difference without judgment. Experience happens first. Sensation arises. An event occurs. Then the mind begins to narrate. It assigns meaning, intention, and consequence. This narration often feels inseparable from reality. Yet, it is an added layer, not the thing itself. When a thought says, "This always happens to me," that is not experience. It is memory speaking. When a thought says, "This will never change," that is not experience. It is anticipation speaking.
When a thought says, "This means something is wrong with me," that is not experience. It is identity forming. Zen does not ask us to reject these stories or fight them. It simply encourages us to recognize them as stories. When seen clearly, they loosen their grip. They lose the authority they once had to define the moment.
In direct experience, there is often far less drama than the mind suggests. There is breathing. There is listening. There is the quiet presence that notices both comfort and discomfort without needing to resolve them. As awareness rests here, even briefly, the nervous system softens. The mind no longer needs to solve or fix what is simply passing through. What remains is a gentle clarity that does not depend on circumstances changing. This reflection is not about becoming passive. It is about returning to what is actually happening, rather than what is being imagined about it. From this place, response becomes more natural, less strained, and far less exhausting.
As the man continued to sit in quiet attention, the teacher invited him to try something simple. For a moment, he said, "Do not follow the story. Do not correct it. Do not replace it. Just notice what remains when you do not step into it." At first, the mind resisted. It reached for explanations, for familiar conclusions.
For something to hold on to. But beneath that movement, there was something quieter already present. There was the sensation of breathing without commentary. There was sound arriving and fading without interpretation. There was awareness itself, open and steady, requiring no effort to maintain. Zen calls this resting without the story. It is not a special state. It is not something achieved through concentration or discipline. It is simply the natural condition that appears when the mind is no longer busy, adding meaning to each moment. When a thought arises and passes without being followed.
Nothing is lost. When a feeling moves through awareness without being named or judged, nothing needs to be resolved. Experience continues, but without the extra weight of narrative. This, resting, does not remove life's challenges. What it removes is the unnecessary tension created by constant mental rehearsal. The body responds more easily. The breath deepens on its own. The sense of urgency softens. The teacher explained that this is why Zen emphasizes direct presence over understanding. Understanding belongs to thought. Presence belongs to awareness.
When awareness is allowed to rest as itself, effort naturally falls away. In this resting, there is no need to become calm. Calm arrives as a byproduct of not interfering. There is no need to feel peaceful. Peace is simply revealed when resistance stops. For the man, this was the first time in a long while that he felt truly unburdened. Not because life had changed, but because he was no longer carrying the extra layer of explanation everywhere he went. As the teacher and the man sat together in silence, there was nothing more to explain. No conclusion was drawn, no lesson was summarized. The understanding did not arrive as an idea, but as a felt sense of ease. The man realized that nothing needed to be removed from his life. No thought had to be erased. No feeling had to be fixed. All that was required was the willingness to stop carrying each moment forward as a story. Zen does not promise a life without difficulty. It reveals something quieter and more reliable. That, when experience is allowed to arrive and depart without commentary, it leaves far less behind. The mind becomes lighter, not because it holds better thoughts, but because it learns when not to hold at all. This is not a practice to master. It is a remembering, a returning to the simple fact of being here, before interpretation, before judgment, before identity forms around passing sensations. And as this story settles, there is nothing you need to do with it. You do not need to remember it. You do not need to apply it. Let it rest where all stories eventually return, in silence. In that silence, another teaching quietly waits to reveal itself. One that speaks not about stories we carry, but about how we meet what cannot be avoided. There was once a monk who had spent many years refining his practice. He rose before dawn, kept strict discipline, and avoided anything that might disturb his inner balance. To others, his life appeared calm and orderly. Yet beneath that calm lived a quiet fear. He feared disruption. He feared loss. He feared the moments he could not control. One day, his teacher asked him a simple question. "What will you do?" The teacher said. When life does not cooperate with your efforts, the monk answered confidently, "I will practice harder. I will become more steady." The teacher nodded but said nothing more. Not long after, illness entered the monastery. A sudden sickness spread through the community, leaving no one untouched. Schedules dissolved. Silence was broken by coughing and restlessness.
The monk found himself unable to meditate as before. His body weakened, his mind grew unsettled. For the first time, his practice did not protect him. In his discomfort, the monk felt betrayed. He had done everything correctly. He had followed the path with devotion. And yet, suffering had arrived anyway. When the teacher finally came to sit beside him, the monk spoke with frustration. "I thought practice was meant to free us from this." The teacher replied softly, "Practice does not remove what cannot be avoided. It teaches us how to remain present when removal is no longer possible." Zen points directly to this truth. Some experiences will arrive regardless of preparation. Aging, illness, loss, uncertainty. No discipline can prevent them. No insight can erase them. What changes is not the event, but our relationship to it. The monk began to notice that his greatest pain was not the illness itself. It was the resistance, the wish that things were otherwise, the belief that something had gone wrong. As that resistance slowly loosened, something unexpected happened. The suffering did not disappear, but it softened. Breath became possible again. Rest returned in small moments, not because conditions improved, but because fighting them ceased. In meeting what could not be avoided, the monk discovered a deeper stability than control had ever offered. As the monk lay resting, he began to see something he had overlooked for years. The discomfort in his body came and went in waves. Some moments were sharp, others mild. But what exhausted him most was not the sensation itself. It was the silent argument with reality. Each time the mind said, "This should not be happening," tension tightened. Each time it asked, "Why now?" energy drained away. Each time it searched for a way out, the present moment was abandoned. Zen reflection points to this pattern with clarity. Pain may arise without permission, but suffering grows when resistance is added. Acceptance, though in this sense, is not approval. It is not resignation. It is the simple recognition that what is here is already here. When resistance softens, experience becomes workable. Breath can move again. Attention widens. Even difficult sensations are held within a larger field of awareness that does not need to push them away. The monk noticed that when he stopped demanding relief, relief arrived in another form. Not as comfort, but as space. Space to breathe. Space to rest. Space to meet each moment as it came, without needing it to be different. Acceptance does not make life passive. It makes response possible. From acceptance, wise action can arise naturally. From resistance, only struggle repeats itself. Zen teaches that peace is not found by arranging conditions perfectly, but by learning how to remain present when conditions cannot be arranged at all. In seeing this, the monk did not become stronger by force. He became steadier by letting go. As days passed, the monk discovered that acceptance was not something he had to force. It was something that appeared when he stopped tightening around experience. When discomfort arose, he practiced staying close to it without naming it as a problem. He noticed where the body resisted and where it softened. He allowed breath to move naturally without using it as a tool to escape. Zen calls this allowing, not welcoming pain and not rejecting it. Simply letting experience be exactly what it is, without adding struggle. In allowing, the monk found that sensations changed on their own. Some faded, others shifted, none remained fixed. What remained steady was the awareness noticing these changes. This awareness did not suffer. It did not need conditions to improve. It simply observed, This realization brought unexpected rest. Even when the body was tired, the mind no longer exhausted itself fighting. The energy once used for resistance became available for presence. Allowing did not make the monk careless.
He still took medicine. He still rested when needed, but these actions arose from clarity, not from fear. Zen teaches that when we allow what is here, life reveals its natural intelligence. The body knows how to heal. The mind knows when to rest. Awareness knows how to hold experience without collapsing into it. In this deepening, the monk began to understand that peace does not require comfort. It requires honesty, an honest meeting with what is already present. And in that honesty, something within him settled. As the monk slowly recovered, something fundamental had changed. Life did not return to the way it had been before.
His body remained more fragile, his days less predictable. And yet, he felt steadier than he ever had during years of strict discipline. He no longer measured peace by the absence of difficulty. He recognized it instead as the capacity to remain present when difficulty appeared. The teacher later explained that this was the difference between control and stability. Control depends on circumstances behaving as expected. Stability remains even when they do not. One collapses under pressure. The other deepens. Zen does not promise protection from life's turning. It offers something quieter and more enduring. The strength that comes from not resisting what must be met. When resistance falls away, experience is no longer an enemy. Even pain becomes workable. Even uncertainty becomes part of the path. Nothing needs to be pushed out of awareness in order for peace to remain. As this understanding settled, the monk found himself resting more easily. Not because answers had appeared, but because the need for answers had loosened. And as this teaching comes to rest, there is nothing more to hold, no conclusion to reach, just the gentle recognition that meeting life fully is already enough. From here, another story waits, one that speaks not about what happens to us, but about how we carry ourselves through change itself. There was once an old Zen teacher who had spent his entire life walking the same mountain paths. He knew every stone, every bend in the trail, every place where fog gathered in the early morning. Students often asked him how he never seemed to lose his way. One evening, a young traveler approached him with a troubled expression. "I feel lost," the traveler said. "I don't know where my life is going. I need clarity before I take my next step." The teacher listened quietly and then invited the traveler to walk with him as dusk settled over the mountain. The light faded slowly, and soon the path ahead could no longer be seen clearly. The traveler grew uneasy. "How can you keep walking?" he asked, "when you cannot see where the path leads?" The teacher smiled gently. "If I needed to see the entire path," he replied, "I would never move at all." They continued walking, one step at a time. The teacher placed each foot carefully, responding to the ground beneath him, rather than to an imagined destination. The traveler noticed that although the future remained unclear, each step was steady. Zen points to this quiet truth. Life does not reveal itself all at once. Direction is discovered through movement, not through certainty. When we wait for complete understanding before acting, we often remain frozen. The teacher explained that not knowing is not a mistake. It is the natural condition of living. Clarity does not arrive before the journey. It emerges within it. As the traveler walked on, his anxiety softened. He realized that his fear had not come from uncertainty itself, but from the belief that uncertainty should not exist. In learning to walk without knowing the destination, he began to trust the ground beneath each step. As the traveler reflected on the teacher's words, he began to recognize how deeply the fear of uncertainty shaped his choices. It was not the unknown itself that troubled him, but the feeling of being unsupported when answers were absent. The mind often believes safety comes from certainty. Plans, predictions, and guarantees feel like solid ground. Yet Zen reflection reveals something quieter and more honest. Life has never offered certainty, even during moments that appeared stable. When the mind insists on knowing what comes next, it tightens. It searches ahead, leaving the present moment behind. In doing so, it misses the only place where support actually exists, right here. Uncertainty does not mean danger. It means openness. It means the future has not been fixed into a narrow shape.
The discomfort we feel around not knowing often arises from habit, not from actual threat. Zen invites us to notice how often we confuse clarity with control. We want reassurance that things will unfold in a particular way, but reassurance fades quickly. Control requires constant maintenance. Presence does not.
When the traveler allowed himself to rest in not knowing, even briefly, he noticed something unexpected. His breath remained steady. The ground beneath him did not disappear. Each moment continued to offer what was needed for the next step. Uncertainty, when met without resistance, becomes space, and in that space, intuition begins to speak more clearly than planning ever could. As the walk continued, the teacher slowed his pace even further. He did not hurry the path, nor did he hesitate. Each step arose naturally from the one before it, guided not by foresight, but by attention. The traveler began to sense that trust was not something to be summoned through effort. It emerged when the mind stopped demanding proof. Trust appeared in the quiet agreement to meet the next moment without argument. Zen deepening points here. We do not need to trust the entire journey. We only need to trust the step that is already arriving. When attention rests fully in the present, the next movement becomes obvious. Not because it is planned, but because it is felt. The teacher explained that life rarely asks us to leap into the unknown all at once. It asks for a small willingness to place one foot down, to feel the ground respond, to notice that support appears where contact is made. When the traveler stopped scanning the darkness ahead, his body relaxed. He could feel balance returning. Muscles softened, breath steadied. Trust was no longer an idea. It was a physical experience. Zen teaches that intuition grows clearer when noise subsides. When the mind is no longer busy rehearsing futures, it becomes sensitive to subtle signals. Fatigue is noticed before exhaustion. Curiosity appears before fear. Right action emerges before doubt has time to form. In trusting the next step, the traveler realized that guidance had never been absent. It had only been overshadowed by the demand to know more than the moment could offer. When the walk finally came to an end, the traveler noticed something quietly remarkable. The path had never revealed itself in advance, yet he had not stumbled. Each step had been supported, not by certainty, but by presence. The teacher did not offer a final explanation. He simply stood still and allowed the moment to complete itself. In that stillness, the traveler understood that clarity is not something we carry with us. It is something that appears when we arrive fully. Zen does not ask us to abandon direction. It asks us to release the demand for guarantees. Life unfolds one step at a time, and each step contains exactly the guidance required for that moment.
Not knowing is not emptiness. It is openness. And within openness, life responds with quiet precision. As this teaching settles, there is nothing to resolve, no lesson to remember, just the gentle sense that walking is enough, even when the destination remains unseen. From here, another story waits.
One that speaks not about movement, but about stillness, and the space that reveals itself when nothing is being pursued. There was once a Zen monk who had spent many years searching for stillness. He believed that if his mind could finally become quiet, something essential would reveal itself. Each day, he sat longer. Each retreat, he tried harder. And yet, the stillness he imagined always seemed just beyond reach. One evening, exhausted from effort, he went to see his teacher. "No matter how much I practice," the monk said, "my mind keeps moving. Thoughts rise, feelings shift,
Sensations come and go. I cannot find the stillness everyone speaks of." The teacher listened without interruption. Then he asked a question so simple that it initially confused the monk. "When you notice movement," the teacher said. "What is it that notices?" The monk hesitated. He had never considered this. He had been so focused on
stopping thoughts that he had overlooked the awareness in which those thoughts appeared. The teacher invited him to sit, not to quiet the mind, but to rest as the one who was already aware. No correction, no improvement, just sitting. As the monk settled, he noticed that thoughts continued to arise. Sounds still entered the room. Sensations moved through the body. And yet, beneath all of it, there was something unmoving. A quiet presence that did not change with content. Zen points to this directly. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the space in which movement appears. The monk realized that he had been searching for something he was already resting within. The stillness he sought had never been missing. It had simply been overlooked. As the monk rested with the teacher's question, a subtle understanding began to unfold. He saw that his struggle had never been with thoughts themselves, but with the belief that stillness required their disappearance. Zen reflection invites us to look more closely. Thoughts move. Sensations shift. Sounds arise and fade. Yet none of these movements disturb the awareness that knows them. Awareness remains unchanged, like a quiet sky through which clouds pass. When we try to force stillness, we create tension. Effort tightens the body. Judgment sharpens the mind. The search itself becomes movement layered on top of movement. In this way, striving hides what it seeks. Stillness is not produced. It is revealed when effort relaxes. The monk noticed that even when his mind was active, there was a background presence that did not hurry.
It did not comment. It did not resist. This presence was already still, regardless of content. Zen teaches that peace is not a condition to be achieved, but a quality to be recognized. When attention shifts from controlling experience to noticing the one who is aware, stillness becomes obvious and immediate. This reflection changes how practice is approached. Instead of trying to silence the mind, we learn to rest as the space in which the mind appears. Movement continues, but it no longer feels threatening. It is held gently, without interference. In recognizing stillness beneath movement, the monk understood that nothing needed to be removed from his experience. Everything could be included, without disturbing what is fundamentally calm. As the monk remained seated, the teacher offered no further instruction. There was nothing to adjust, nothing to improve,
The invitation was simple rest as what is already aware.
At first, the habit of effort returned. The mind tried to position itself correctly, to hold attention in a particular way. But gradually, even this softened. Attention stopped doing and began allowing. Awareness did not need to focus. It did not need to expand. It was already present, already open, already steady.
Thoughts continued to arise. Yet they appeared more like gentle movements on water than disruptions. Zen deepening points to this shift. When we stop identifying with what appears and rest as the one in which it appears, experience becomes lighter. Sensations are felt fully without being owned. Thoughts pass without needing resolution. Resting as awareness does not mean withdrawing from life. It means meeting life without contraction. The body breathes. Sounds come and go. The world continues. But the sense of being pushed or pulled by experience dissolves. The monk noticed that when he rested as awareness, there was no center that needed protection.
Nothing to defend, nothing to maintain. Presence held everything without effort. In this resting, time seemed to lose urgency. Moments unfolded without pressure. Even movement felt spacious. Stillness was no longer something separate from activity. It was the quiet foundation beneath it. Zen teaches that this awareness is not
personal. It does not belong to anyone. It is the same presence that hears these words now. Unmoving, inclusive, and complete. As the monk settled into this recognition, the search ended, not with a conclusion, but with a gentle release. As the sitting came to a natural close, the monk did not feel as though he had arrived anywhere new. There was no peak experience, no final insight to hold. Instead, there was a quiet familiarity, as if something long known had simply been remembered. The teacher later said that this was the sign of genuine stillness. Not an event, but an absence of seeking. Not a special condition, but the recognition that nothing has been missing at any point along the way. Zen does not ask us to freeze the mind or preserve calm. It invites us to see that calm does not depend on what the mind is doing. Movement can continue. Life can unfold. Stillness remains untouched. When awareness rests as itself, effort naturally falls away. The need to manage experience dissolves. What remains is a gentle openness that does not require maintenance. As this understanding settles, there is no instruction to follow and no memory to keep. Just the simple fact of being here, complete in its ordinariness. From this quiet ground, another story waits to be heard. One that speaks not of stillness or movement, but of how even the smallest moments carry their own quiet teaching. There was once a Zen teacher who rarely spoke during formal gatherings. When students asked him questions, he often answered with silence, or with a gesture so ordinary that it was easily overlooked. Some students found this frustrating. Others stayed, sensing that something important was being shown without explanation. One morning, as the monastery prepared for the day, a student noticed the teacher quietly sweeping fallen leaves from the path. The movement was slow and unhurried. Each stroke of the broom followed the last, without interruption. The student approached and asked, "Master, is there a teaching in this?" The teacher paused, looked at the student, and then continued sweeping. After a moment, he said softly, "If you are not present for this, you will not be present for anything." The student watched more closely. The sound of leaves gathering, the feeling of the ground beneath bare feet, the steady rhythm of breath moving with each motion. Nothing about the scene was special, and yet it felt complete. Zen often hides its teachings in what is easily dismissed. Not in grand moments or dramatic insight, but in the quiet tasks that fill each day. Carrying water, preparing food, walking from one place to another. These moments do not demand attention, which is why they reveal so much when attention is finally given. The teacher explained that when the mind waits for something meaningful to happen, it misses what is already happening. Meaning does not arrive later. It appears when we stop looking elsewhere. As the leaves were cleared from the path, the student sensed that the teaching had not been delivered in words. It had been shown in the simple act of doing one thing, fully, without resistance. And in that simplicity, nothing was lacking. As the student reflected on the teacher's words, he began to notice how often his attention had been elsewhere. Even in quiet moments, the mind leaned forward, waiting for something more meaningful to arrive. A clearer insight, a deeper feeling, a moment that would finally feel complete. Zen reflection gently turns attention back to this habit. Waiting itself creates distance.
When the mind waits, it places value in the future and quietly dismisses the present. Ordinary moments are passed over, not because they lack depth, but because attention is not fully here to meet them. When attention stops waiting, something subtle shifts. The mind no longer scans for improvement. It settles into what is already happening. A sound is just a sound. A movement is just a movement. There is no need for these moments to become something else. This does not require concentration or effort. It happens naturally when the habit of postponement is seen clearly.
The mind relaxes its grip on expectation, and awareness opens to what has been present all along. In this openness, even the smallest details feel complete. The weight of a cup in the hand, the rhythm of walking, the quiet pause between breaths. None of these moments announce themselves as important, yet each carries the fullness that attention has been seeking elsewhere.
Zen does not ask us to create meaning. It invites us to stop overlooking it. When attention rests without waiting, life reveals itself without needing to change. As the student remained near the teacher, he began to notice the quality of attention being offered to each small action. There was no hurry in the movements, no hesitation,
no sense of multitasking. Each step completed itself before the next began. Zen deepening points to this simplicity. When attention is divided, experience feels thin and unsettled. When attention is whole, even the most ordinary activity feels grounded. The difference is not in the task itself, but in the presence brought to it. Doing one thing completely does not mean forcing focus or blocking out distraction. It means allowing attention to rest where the body already is. When sweeping, there is sweeping. When walking, there is walking. Nothing extra is required. As the student tried this for himself, he noticed that thoughts still appeared, but they no longer pulled attention away as strongly. The body knew what to do, and awareness followed naturally. Effort softened. The sense of time slowed. Zen teaches that completeness is not achieved by doing more, but by doing less at a time. When the mind stops reaching ahead or returning to what is past, it meets the present moment fully. In this meeting, activity becomes quiet, not because it stops, but because resistance ends. The simplest actions reveal a steady rhythm that supports attention without strain. The student realized that this way of being did not belong only to the monastery. It could follow him anywhere. In each task, there was an opportunity to arrive completely, without searching for something beyond it. As the morning passed, The teacher finished sweeping and set the broom aside. Nothing remarkable followed. No comment, no instruction. The path was clear.
And the day continued. The student noticed that the simplicity of the moment lingered. There was no urge to move on, no sense that something more should happen. The ordinary activity had completed itself, and in doing so, it left a quiet sense of sufficiency. Zen does not separate the sacred from the simple. When attention is whole,
even the smallest action carries depth. When attention is divided, even the grandest moment feels incomplete. What matters is not the scale of the task, but the presence with which it is met. In recognizing this, the student understood that teaching does not always arrive as instruction. Sometimes it appears as a pause, a breath, a single action done without hurry. These moments do not call attention to themselves. Yet they steady the mind more deeply than explanation ever could. As this understanding settles, there is nothing to remember and nothing to apply. Just the gentle invitation to meet whatever comes next with the same quiet care. From here, another story waits to unfold. One that speaks not about doing, but about how listening itself can become a form of stillness. There was once a Zen student who believed he understood silence. He practiced sitting quietly, avoided unnecessary speech, and valued calm surroundings. Yet whenever he listened to others, his mind filled the space with interpretation, agreement, disagreement, and quiet judgment. One day, he approached his teacher and said, "I practice silence every day, but I still feel restless when I listen. Why does quiet not bring peace?" The teacher did not answer right away. Instead, he rang a small bell and let its sound fade completely into the air. When nothing remained, he asked, "Where did the sound go?" The student hesitated. "It disappeared," he said. The teacher shook his head gently. "It was not the sound that disappeared. It was your attention that stopped following it." He invited the student to sit and listen again. Not to the bell, but to everything that arrived. Wind moving through the trees, distant footsteps, the subtle hum of the room itself. The instruction was simple. Do not name, do not evaluate, do not respond, just listen. At first, the student noticed how quickly the mind wanted to interfere. Each sound became a thought. Each pause became something to fill. But slowly, as effort softened, listening changed. Sounds arrived and departed without leaving a trace. Zen teaches that true listening is not passive. It is receptive without addition. When nothing is added, nothing needs to be removed. Silence is no longer something we seek. It is revealed between sounds. As the student rested in this listening, the restlessness he had carried began to settle. Not because the world had become quieter, but because he was no longer standing between himself and what he heard. And in that simple openness, silence was no longer an absence. It was the space that held everything. As the student remained with the teacher's instruction, he began to notice how rarely he actually heard anything. Most sounds were immediately translated into meaning, pleasant or unpleasant, familiar or distracting, important or irrelevant. The moment interpretation appeared, listening quietly ended. Zen reflection invites us to observe this process without trying to stop it. Interpretation is not wrong. It is simply extra. When attention learns to recognize the difference between hearing and explaining what is heard, space opens naturally. Hearing itself is simple. Sound arrives. Vibration is felt, then it fades. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be remembered. The mind complicates this only when it insists on commentary. When interpretation relaxes, listening deepens. Sounds are no longer divided into categories. They are received equally, without preference. Even silence becomes audible, not as emptiness, but as a subtle presence between sounds.
This kind of listening does not dull awareness. It sharpens it, without the noise of mental reaction. Each sound stands clearly on its own. The mind grows quieter, not because silence is forced, but because there is less to argue with. Zen teaches that peace does not come from controlling what we hear. It comes from allowing sound to arrive
and depart without interference. In this, allowing, listening becomes restful. Attention no longer strains. Awareness holds everything gently. As the student sensed this, he realized that much of his restlessness had come from trying to manage experience rather than meet it. When management stopped, listening became effortless. As the student continued to listen without interpretation, something unexpected happened. The boundary between sound and silence began to soften. Sounds no longer felt like interruptions, and silence no longer felt empty. Each sound arrived, lingered briefly, and then dissolved back into stillness. Silence was not broken by sound. It held sound. In this way, listening became spacious and without tension or effort. Zen deepening points to this gentle shift. When we stop reacting to sound, awareness reveals its natural openness. There is room for everything. Nothing needs to be excluded. Nothing needs to be emphasized. The student noticed that even thoughts had a sound-like quality. They arose, echoed briefly, and faded. When treated the same way as external sound, thoughts lost their power to disturb. They became part of the same field of listening. Resting in sound and silence does not require concentration. It happens when attention stops narrowing. The ears do not strain. The mind does not chase. Awareness simply receives. In this receiving, the sense of a listener dissolves. There is hearing, but no one trying to hear. There is silence, but no one waiting for it. Experience flows naturally, without a center. Zen teaches that this kind of listening reveals a deep stillness that is not separate from movement. Stillness and sound are not opposites. They are expressions of the same open presence. As the student rested here, effort fell away completely. Listening became rest itself. As the listening settled, the student noticed there was no effort left to release. Sound and silence moved freely, without demand or preference. Nothing needed to be named. Nothing needed to be held. The teacher later said that this was the heart of silence. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of resistance. When listening no longer adds or subtracts, silence reveals itself as the open space in which everything belongs. Zen does not ask us to retreat from sound or seek quiet conditions. It invites us to listen so completely that nothing stands in the way. In this listening, the world is allowed to be exactly as it is, and the mind rests naturally. As this teaching comes to a close, there is nothing to practice and nothing to remember. Only the gentle recognition that silence has been present all along, patiently holding every sound. From here, another story begins to form, one that speaks not about listening or silence, but about the simple trust that appears when nothing needs to be explained. There was once a Zen practitioner who believed that trust had to be earned. He trusted only what he could understand, what he could prepare for, what he could control. When life unfolded as expected, he felt steady. When it did not, doubt quietly took over. One evening, he approached his teacher and said, "I lose my balance whenever things change. How can I trust life when it is so uncertain?" The teacher did not answer immediately. Instead, he placed a small bowl on the ground and filled it with water. As the surface settled, the reflection became clear. Then, there, with a gentle tap, the water rippled and the image disappeared. "Did the reflection leave the bowl?" the teacher asked. The student looked closely. The water was still there. The image was never something you could hold. The teacher continued. It appeared when conditions were calm and vanished when they moved. What remained was the water itself. The student watched as the ripples slowly softened on their own. Nothing had been fixed. Nothing had been forced. And yet, clarity returned. Zen points to this quiet trust. Not trust in outcomes, plans, or certainty, but trust in what remains present through change. Thoughts shift. Feelings rise and fall. Circumstances turn without warning. And still, awareness continues, steady and unmoved. The practitioner realized that his struggle had not been with uncertainty, but with the demand that life stay still long enough to feel safe. When that demand softened, something deeper than control began to appear. Trust, he saw, was not something to build. It was something already there,
waiting to be noticed beneath the movement of events. As the practitioner reflected on the teacher's demonstration, he began to sense how tightly trust had been bound to conditions. When life appeared stable, trust felt possible. When change arrived, trust withdrew. It became clear that what he had called trust was often only agreement with
circumstances. Zen reflection gently loosens this association. Trust does not depend on predictability. It does not require assurance that things will unfold in a particular way. True trust rests deeper, beneath outcome and expectation. When the mind demands certainty, it tightens around experience. It looks ahead, rehearses possibilities, and searches for guarantees. In doing so, it leaves the present moment uninhabited. Trust, however, lives only here. It cannot be stored for the future or borrowed from the past. The practitioner noticed that even when he did not know what would happen next, awareness remained steady. Breath continued. Sensation unfolded. The capacity to meet the moment was already functioning, without permission or proof. Zen teaches that this is the ground of trust, not confidence in results, but confidence in presence. When we trust that awareness can meet whatever arises, the need for certainty softens on its own. This does not remove fear entirely. It changes our relationship to it. Fear may appear, but it no longer defines the moment. It becomes one movement among many, held within a larger field that remains intact. As this reflection settled, the practitioner felt a quiet shift. Trust no longer felt like something to achieve. It felt like something to allow, a gentle leaning back into what had been supporting him all along. As the practitioner remained with this quieter sense of trust, he noticed a subtle change in how life was met. Decisions no longer felt as heavy. Uncertainty no longer demanded immediate resolution. There was a willingness to pause and feel what was present before moving forward. Zen deepening points to this shift. Trust is not something we actively apply to situations. It is something we allow to support us when control relaxes. When effort softens, trust naturally carries what effort once tried to manage. The practitioner began to see that many of his actions had been driven by the need to secure outcomes. Even small choices were weighed down by anticipation. When trust was allowed to lead instead, action became simpler. One step followed another without inner debate. This did not make life passive. It made it responsive. The body sensed when to move and when to rest. Words arose when needed and fell away when they were not. Trust expressed itself as timing rather than certainty. Zen teaches that trust deepens when we stop asking it to guarantee safety. Safety is not found in predictability, but in the ability to meet whatever appears. When this ability is recognized, the future no longer needs to be controlled.
As the practitioner rested here, there was a gentle sense of being held. Not by answers, not by plans, but by the quiet intelligence of awareness itself. Life continued to change, yet nothing essential felt threatened. In letting trust carry him, he discovered that effort had been trying to do what trust could do naturally.
As the practitioner allowed trust to carry him, there was no dramatic shift. Life continued to move, conditions continued to change, and uncertainty remained. Yet the inner struggle that once accompanied these movements had softened. Trust, he saw, was not a belief about the future. It was a relationship with the present. When attention rested here, the need to secure outcomes fell away naturally. Zen does not offer certainty as comfort. It offers something quieter and more stable. The recognition that awareness remains present through every change, holding each moment without needing to predict it.
In this recognition, even uncertainty becomes workable. It no longer threatens identity or balance. It simply becomes another movement within a larger field that remains intact. As this teaching settles, there is nothing to grasp and nothing to conclude. Just the gentle sense that whatever comes next can be met, not because it is known,
but because awareness is already here. From this place of quiet trust, another story waits to be told. One that speaks not about believing or understanding, but about the freedom found in not needing to choose at all. There was once a Zen monk who struggled deeply with decision-making. Each choice, no matter how small, felt heavy with consequence. He weighed possibilities endlessly, afraid that a wrong step might close the door to the right life. One evening, he went to his teacher and said, "I am exhausted from choosing. How do I know which path is correct?" The teacher listened quietly, then pointed to the setting sun and asked, "Did the sun choose to set?" The monk was confused. "No," he said. "It simply does." The teacher nodded. "And did the night choose to arrive again?" The monk shook his head. The teacher continued, "Life moves this way as well. Not everything requires choice. Some moments ask only for participation." The monk sat with this in silence. He realized how often he tried to control life through decision, even when the next step was already present. In his effort to choose correctly, he had been standing apart from the flow of events. Zen points to this quiet freedom. When awareness is clear, action arises without deliberation. The body knows when to move. Words know when to appear. Choice dissolves into response. This does not mean that decisions never occur. It means that when conditions are seen clearly, action is obvious. There is no inner conflict because there is no imagined alternative to defend. As the monk watched the last light fade from the sky, he felt a rare sense of ease. For the first time, he sensed that life did not require him to manage it. It required him to meet it. And in that meeting, the burden of choice quietly lifted. As the monk reflected on the teacher's words, he began to see how much effort he had been spending on imagined alternatives. Each decision had felt heavy because it was weighed against futures that did not yet exist. The mind had been busy comparing, predicting, and defending possibilities, long before action was required. Zen reflection gently reframes this habit. Clarity does not come from examining every option. It comes from meeting the moment fully. When attention is present, what needs to be done often reveals itself without debate. Action becomes unclear when the mind steps ahead of experience. It asks questions before the situation has finished forming. It searches for certainty where only responsiveness is needed. In doing so,
It creates tension where none is required. When awareness rests with what is actually happening, choice simplifies. The body senses what is appropriate. Timing becomes obvious. Words arise naturally, without rehearsal. There is no sense of selecting among paths because only one path is alive in the moment. Zen does not deny responsibility.
it points to a quieter intelligence beneath deliberation. When this intelligence is trusted, action flows without strain. There is no regret because there is no resistance. What occurs feels complete, even as it passes. As this reflection settled, the monk noticed a lightness he had not felt before. Decisions no longer carried the weight of identity. They became simple movements within a larger flow that did not depend on him to manage it. As the monk lived with this growing clarity, he noticed that hesitation began to fade. Not because he forced himself to be decisive, but because the inner argument had quieted. When attention rested fully in the present, response arose naturally, without the need to consult fear or preference. Zen deepening points to this responsiveness. Hesitation appears when the mind splits the moment into options and outcomes. Response appears when the moment is met as a whole. In that meeting, action is not chosen. It emerges. The monk observed that when a task appeared, his body already knew how to move toward it. When a question arose, words formed without rehearsal. When rest was needed, the body softened without negotiation. None of this felt dramatic. It felt ordinary and precise. Responding without hesitation does not mean acting impulsively. It means acting without inner resistance. There is no rush and no delay. Timing aligns because attention is not elsewhere. Zen teaches that when we stop living in imagined futures, the present moment becomes sufficient guidance. What needs to be done reveals itself clearly, step by step. There is no need to decide in advance what life should become. As the monk rested in this way of responding, effort fell away. Life no longer felt like a series of tests to pass. It felt like a continuous unfolding, asking only to be met honestly. In this honesty, action carried no burden. Each response completed itself and then released, leaving no residue behind. With time, the monk understood that the deepest peace was not found in stillness alone, but in allowing each action to complete itself fully. Nothing needed to be carried forward. Nothing needed to be reviewed. When a moment ended, it ended completely. This was not forgetting. It was freedom from accumulation. Zen does not ask us to erase memory, but to stop dragging unfinished echoes of the past into the present. When attention remains whole, each experience rises, unfolds, and dissolves naturally, like a breath that knows exactly when to end. The monk no longer measured his day by success or failure. He measured it by presence, and in that presence, even the simplest acts carried quiet dignity.
Walking was just walking. Listening was just listening. Rest was just rest. Nothing extra was added. Nothing was missing. In this simplicity, life no longer asked him to improve himself. It only asked him to arrive.
And arriving fully was enough. And as this understanding settles, another story waits nearby, ready to reveal a different doorway into the same quiet truth. As the night deepens, the teachings begin to soften into something quieter. Not ideas to understand, not lessons to remember, but a gentle invitation to rest. Zen speaks of a moment when seeking naturally comes to an end. Not because answers have been found, but because the need to search dissolves. In this final passage, there is nothing left to resolve. Nothing to improve, nothing to reach, only the simple experience of being here.
Breath rises, breath falls. Thoughts may still appear, drifting like distant lights on a quiet road, but they no longer ask to be followed. The mind does not need to become silent. It only needs to stop chasing silence. In this space, rest is no longer something we try to enter. It is what remains when effort gently releases itself.
And from this, resting, the last story begins. Not as a teaching to hold, but as a mirror reflecting the stillness that has been present all along. There is an old Zen saying that when the path is fully walked, nothing remains in the hands. In this final story, there is no struggle and no revelation. Only a quiet noticing of what has always been here. A monk once asked his teacher, near the end of a long retreat, when everything has been understood, what remains? The teacher did not answer immediately. He simply poured tea into a cup and placed it gently before the monk. The steam rose. The surface of the tea trembled slightly, then became still. After a long silence, the teacher spoke. "Drink," he said, "and when the cup is empty, do not look for anything else." The monk lifted the cup. He drank slowly, feeling the warmth move through his body. When the cup was empty, he set it down. Nothing happened, and yet, something subtle shifted. There was no sense of loss, no need to refill the cup, no urge to ask another question. The moment was complete as it was. Zen does not end with answers. It ends with the absence of questions, not because life has been solved, but because life no longer needs to be held. After the last story fades, there is nothing more to follow. No thread to hold, no meaning to extract. The mind may notice this absence and briefly reach for something familiar. A thought, sadiri, towards a memory, a conclusion, but there is no need to respond. Silence does not require agreement. It only asks to be allowed. In this settling, awareness does not disappear. It becomes wider, softer, less interested in naming what it contains. Sounds may still arise. The rhythm of breath continues. The body adjusts itself naturally, without instruction. Nothing is being guided now. Zen often speaks of returning to the ordinary. But here, even the ordinary loosens its edges. What remains is not an idea of peace, but the simple absence of disturbance. You do not need to hold this state. You cannot lose it. Silence is not something you enter. It is what is revealed when effort steps aside. And in this quiet resting, the night completes itself. There is nothing left to listen for now. Nothing you need to remember. The words can fade. The stories can dissolve. Breath continues on its own. The body knows how to rest. Whatever understanding was meant to arrive has already arrived, not as a thought, but as a quiet ease beneath everything. You do not need to stay awake for this. You do not need to follow anything further.
The night is wide enough to hold you without effort, and rest comes naturally when nothing is being asked. So allow the silence to continue. Allow the darkness to deepen gently. There is nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. And in this simple letting go, sleep is already here.